Hi, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Liza Meynig. After having spent most of my life on and off the mission field, having been raised in the church, and having gone through my own abusive relationships with men and come out the other side, I've realized one important thing in life. A relationship with God is vital. The problem is that we have a lot of religion and legalism in this world, giving us a long to-do list of what we can and cannot do, especially for us ladies. My goal is to create a safe place for women to come together and have the hard, controversial conversations you might not have been able to have before. I want to provoke some critical thinking. I want to hopefully point you towards the Bible and towards a God that might not have been presented to you before. I want us to leave the religion and the legalism behind and be left with a healthy relationship with God. It's time to become who you were meant to be. It's time to become a warrior. Welcome back to the Warriors Podcast. Today, I have one of my really good friends from college, actually, who now lives across the pond in Ireland. I've got Reagan O'Mahony. I never say your name correctly anymore.
You don't. Not many Americans do.
I know. Say it again. Say it for all of us.
It's O'Mahony. So
O'Mahony.
You just break it down into three, like O'Mahony. O'Mahony.
Oh my goodness. And the whole time that I've known you, you've been with your husband. Well, you weren't married when I first met you, but then, so I should know this by now. Anyway, hi Reagan.
Hi, it's fine. It's great. At least you get my first name right. People over here often mispronounce my first name and say Regan. So
that's funny. Reagan O'Mahony.
Yeah. Well, they get the O'Mahony right.
That's true because they're Irish. Anyway.
Used to it. Well, hello. It's nice to be here.
I know. I'm so glad that you are here because I feel like you and I have had so many really good conversations through the years. We shared a similar college experience. We were part of the same college ministry, and then you were over in Ireland and had your own experience there. And I even had another interview with a really good friend of ours, your best friend, Sinead. She's in a different podcast. So the topic I want to talk about with you today, I think is incredibly important. It's a subject people aren't really discussing. And before we dive into that, just want to ask you to share a little bit about yourself, what you do, what you're passionate about.
Well, I'm from Texas originally, and I met and married an Irish man. Mm-hmm. I came over to Ireland, 12 years ago, I think it was, and volunteered at a church for 2 years and ended up meeting my now husband and my best friend Sinead. Mm-hmm. And when we got married, I moved back over, and I have been living life over here with my husband, and his parents had started a church a few years before that in the town where we are. And they, about a year, maybe it was a year ago, I don't know, they handed it over to Mark and me, but we still work very closely with his parents. And it's just kind of a small town. Churches over here are quite small, and I actually kind of like that. It's very localized, and we just try to, help the families in the community that we're in. And it's just a great atmosphere, and it's very warm and welcoming. And I have 3 kids, 5, 3, and 8 months. So life is very busy. And my oldest son has some developmental issues, a lot of developmental issues. So that's very busy. And that's another challenge in and of itself. And, but passionate about, I don't know. I was just telling my husband, I don't really have any hobbies at this point in my life, just because I'm just momming all the time, and it's, I'm a mom. I don't get hobbies. Yeah, exactly. But one day I will again. But I guess I'm passionate about my family. I feel my call as a mom, this is the season I'm in, and I'm going to do it the best I can. It's not perfect. I yell at my kids sometimes, it ain't pretty, but this is my time, and this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now. So, yes, that's kind of where I'm at.
And I
at the
even
moment.
had that conversation with you last time I was in Ireland, because I was watching you with your kids and your husband, and just how you do family and church. And what I loved, and I've said so many different ways, is that life over in Ireland, how you're living it, seems so simple, but yet it's so powerful. Like, you're so 100% committed to being a wife and a mom, and being a pastor's wife, and just constantly being hospitable and generous. But it's so easygoing. It's not the American, like, doing 5 million different things. You're like all in the few things you're doing.
Yeah, I felt like I was never a parent back in Texas. So I can't speak to that, but from seeing other people, and what I grew up in, it feels like there was always this go, 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 even driving down the road back home, so many billboards, so many things to buy, so many things to do and go to, and places to eat. And, whereas here, I think the nearest drive-through restaurant is probably like 20 miles away down at the next it's like the big town in the big city. There's nothing. We're just at home. Even before the lockdown, we're just at home. It's just with our kids. And like, I am a stay-at-home mom, and it is a blessing that we can do that. But we also made a lot of sacrifices so that we could do that. And it doesn't work for everybody. That's fine. I'm not going to, this is what's best for us. So it's worked out well. It's hard. Like, it's not an easy thing to do, to be at home with your kids all day. It's very challenging and hands-on, but I feel like it is one of the most important jobs. You never, ever, ever can be replaced as a mom or a dad. Right. But it is the one thing no one can ever replace you. And I feel like my job right now is to make sure I raise decent human beings for the rest of the world, so that, people who make good choices, and who are kind and compassionate, and who, if they don't grow up to be world changers, that's fine. That's not my goal. My goal is to make sure that they love the people that are around them. They're healthy, they're well balanced emotionally. And that's what I feel passionate about, I guess, if there was something.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you definitely, I see that even on your Instagram stories, that 100% comes through. So I think you're a great mom and a great wife. And I've looked at you so many times because, I love to work. And there was a time when I was like, I would never stay at home with my children. I would hate that. And I think the older I get and the more I've just done life in different ways, the more I've just been like, you don't get that time back, especially when they're little. No. And and then I've seen other people model being a stay-at-home mom really well. And so it's encouraging to me. But you jumping into today's, because I could talk about your kids for forever. They're adorable. And your oldest son calls me the other mommy, which
other mommy, I know. That's right. I have to tell him, guess who talked to me last night? I was talking to your other mom. He couldn't understand why you didn't have kids.
Yes. I love that.
Why you didn't have kids. He was like, He's very blunt. He's like, why don't you have kids?
Right.
Where are your kids?
It's for the other mommy. Where are your children?
Yeah.
Well, you have a topic that you are passionate about, and something that you've lived.
Yes.
You've gone through a lot to take the stance that you do today. And I know you're still in your own process, but the topic that I loved discussing with you was unanswered prayers, and how debilitating unanswered prayers can be. And then, how people act and respond to what you're going through in the church. And just wanted to ask if you could share a little bit about your story and journey with unanswered prayers before we dive into other questions.
Sure. Yeah. So last year, around maybe March, we realized we were pregnant with our third child, and it was exciting and a surprise. And shortly after that, we realized we were pregnant with twins, and that was even more of a shock. And it's a rare thing anyway. And after we got over the initial shock, we were really excited, and we really truly felt like this baby, this extra, baby was an extra blessing from God and a gift from God. And we kind of kept it close, but we shared it with some close friends and family, and just the excitement was just amazing, that there's two. And, we often would think, gosh, how are we going to have two at one time? But it was a lovely time. And then after a few months, I went in for a scan, and I saw the two babies on the sonogram. Now, seeing your kids on the sonogram is just amazing.
Yeah.
It is just the most amazing thing to see that little baby just swimming around and moving around and seeing all the body parts, and then to see two of them, like, that was one of the most amazing moments of my life. It was so. I have pictures of the two of them, and I can still see myself sitting there looking up at this big screen with the two of them there. And they had noticed that there was something wrong with one of the babies, and there was a little bit of fluid at the back of the neck of one of them. And they said, well, look, we'll keep an eye on this. Just come in a few days again. I think it was like a Thursday. They said, come in on Monday and we'll do another scan. And I brought Mark with me, and I was really concerned. I was worried.
Yeah.
They didn't really say much about it. So we spent that whole weekend praying, and my mom was praying, and all of her friends, and everyone was praying. And I went in with Mark, and they were scanning away. And eventually the technician said, we aren't picking up a heartbeat for this baby. And it really floored me. And she's just checking again because it looked like the baby was moving, but it was just kind of floating around. So it wasn't really. But I was realizing, oh my God, like my baby has already died, and I didn't even know. And I started panicking, and I was like, well, do something, fix this. You're a doctor, fix it.
Yeah.
And, it was just like, the ground gets taken out from under you, and, the initial shock and the initial loss and the heartache, and though they were very good in the hospital, very, very considerate. But it really put me on a journey of just shaking, not my belief in God per se, but what I believed about him. And because what had happened went against everything that I had been taught, and everything that we kind of preach about and sing about, and even pray over other people. We were seeking God, we were fervently asking, and we were believing that we were going to get a healing for this baby, and that God would work everything out. And then he didn't. So like, what was I supposed to do with that? And where could I go, and how could I, what sense could I make of that? And I felt betrayed. I felt really betrayed, especially since the baby had already passed away. And I hadn't even known, while I was praying, while I was believing, this baby died, and God did nothing, and it wasn't even something where maybe I was praying for a job or something, and there was someone else who was reviewing my resume and decided not to give it to me. There was no third party. Like, it was only me and God, and he was the only one that could have done something about it. And so it was, for me, it was very personal, and I was very upset. I was very angry for a long time about him, at him, really. And it kind of, like I was saying, it just set me on this journey of dealing with this and how this has happened. How do I make sense of this with my faith and what we talk about in church?
Yeah. Wow. Because I think you're right. There are so many people that deal with, well, they're taught this one part of God's character. And yes, the Bible says all over the Old and New Testament, God is a healer. And it says in Mark, in the Great Commission, we lay hands on the sick and they recover. And so it's preached a lot of times. And I think it's that word of faith type of message that if you pray, God will do this. If you do this, God will for sure do this.
Yeah.
But then that doesn't always happen. And it can be life shattering. And especially when it involves another life, then I've seen people who have prayed for somebody to be healed and then they died. And so it's like, then how do you reconcile that? Because we're not taught what to do if that's not the case. Or we're just told, okay, well, if you pray for somebody, they don't get healed, or, this doesn't happen, you don't get your miracle, then it was your fault that you have
it was your fault.
a lack of faith. Yeah. So how did you deal with all of those like misconceptions that you had been taught?
Well, I think that that adds to a lot of the anger I felt, because I don't think God, I just, the fact that, well, maybe your faith wasn't strong enough, or I think that can't be it. It felt like that betrayal, that if God exists, yet this happened, then something along this line has to have been broken down. You know what I mean? Like if God is real, maybe what we believe and what we teach about him maybe isn't as accurate as I thought. We often tend to make things very formulaic and say, well, if you do this and he does this, I lay my hand here, this is what's going to happen. But God, that doesn't always happen. I mean, God is if he's as big and as powerful as we think he is, he doesn't necessarily have to do everything we say, right? I mean, that doesn't have to happen, and it doesn't happen. And when people don't acknowledge that, like everyone was talking about, well, the coronavirus is going to be over by Passover. And, some big Christians were saying that. And then Passover came and went and nobody said anything. Nobody was like, yeah, remember when you said that? I mean, what are the choices? Like, either you didn't hear God and you thought you did, or you made it up, or, nobody addresses those things. So in reconciling that, I don't know. I feel like I came kind of to a place where I don't know. Sometimes God heals and sometimes he doesn't. And like you, I felt like I've been places praying for people where I felt like there was a miracle, where this person was saying, oh, I don't have any pain anymore. And maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't. But there are people that feel like they've been healed, and that's amazing. Right. But when you don't give room for questioning, and when you don't give room for doubt, you kind of start alienating people, and you make people become quite fake, I think. And recently I had a friend who I realized was dealing with the same thing, dealing with these issues, and a lot of hard things in her life that she'd been praying for a long time for God. And finally she's just like, I don't even know if I believe him anymore, because I don't see anything. And you would never think this person, she's been hiding this for a long time, with nowhere to bring this questions and nowhere to bring this concern. And instead of, let's talk about that, let's say, let's have this discussion, people are going to start leaving. People are going to start, burying these things, which is completely unhealthy. Right. Or just leaving the church and leaving Christianity, leaving their faith.
Yeah. Which I've seen so many times. And, I know you and I both have been on the mission field, and I've struggled in my own journey of praying for people in different countries. And I've seen people who were deaf and all of a sudden they could hear. I've watched people who came in blind and their eyes were glazed over, and we've prayed for them. And then it's like the glaze fell off and they could see. And so I've seen these incredible miracles that many people don't ever get to see. But then I would come home and have all of these family issues and issues with other people that I loved. And there would be things for my family that I would be praying for years and years and years and never see breakthrough. And so I had to come to a point where I was like, God, why is it that I'm seeing all of these miracles in different countries, but I don't see them in my own country, and I don't see them, even amongst the people that I love the most. And so for me, that was my realization of, what if I have been taught the wrong thing, or only taught one side of the coin? And when I started trying to have that conversation, which was years ago, back in college was when I really started running into this. It was just this.
Oh, really? Wow. I didn't realize it was that long ago.
Yeah. And it's been layers, which I'm sure for you, it has been too, but it's this whole, oh, well, you probably just didn't pray hard enough or didn't have enough faith, or you just get pointed to Bible verses where it says, if you have the faith of the size of the mustard seed, or you have faith that can move a mountain literally. And so then you're just left with, oh, well, I must not be as close to the Lord as I thought.
Exactly.
And that's so, like you're saying, it is so not healthy. And there doesn't seem to be a space for people to deal with grief and loss and disappointment. And so there's tons of people just leaving the church, and because we are, like you said, just so formula based, when we don't have a formula to cope with the different side of the coin, a lot of people just throw the towel in, and that's not a healthy thing. So for you, being in ministry and being a pastor's wife, how did you have to navigate through that? Because you're committed.
Yeah. Like I couldn't go anywhere. No. Yeah. It was tricky because what was so difficult for me was worship on a Sunday morning. That was the hardest part. And, Sunday's hard anyway for me, particularly with my oldest son. He's DCD, which is similar to, has a lot of characteristics of autism. So like a big room, lots of people, kind of in kind of an unpredictable atmosphere. Loud music, and he has to kind of sit and be still and be behaved. It's a lot of things for him to have to handle. So praise and worship is hard enough for me. And at the time, Mark has been filling in on the praise and worship team on drums. So I was on my own with the two. At the time, they were just the two, and I was pregnant. And so I come to church and get there and trying to keep my kids happy and under control. And by the way, we have a lovely church family. And when I talk about church, I don't necessarily mean my church or your church, just in general.
Right.
And this story is about my church, but in general, just the atmosphere of Christianity today, I guess. But so when I was going through this, I come to church and the praise and worship, and we all sing. The songs are always about the joy of the Lord, about victory, about, him climbing every mountain and breaking down every wall. I think there's even that song that's like the bridge is like, there's no mountain he won't climb up, which is a nice song.
Great song,
no wall he won't knock down, or something like that. And they sing it, and then they sing it again, but they shout it. And at this, I would stand there and the tears would just be pouring down my face. And I sit in the front because no one can see you in the front. You think everyone can see you, but actually no one can. So the only people who could see me was my husband up there and my friends who were on the worship team. And they knew what was going on, but nobody else could. And I don't mind being vulnerable to the people at church. I'm vulnerable all the time. It just wasn't the place or the time to have a breakdown, So I was, and I was those singing those things. All I wanted to do was just scream at the top of my lungs. Well, you didn't do it for me.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to sing that because you didn't do it. And I don't believe that anymore. And I was, and they weren't tears of heartache. Well, they were, but they were tears of anger. I was so angry, and I was trapped there. I couldn't leave because my children were there. I couldn't drag them with me. I just had to stand there and just listen to this over and over again, week after week, of things that I wasn't sure I believed anymore, because at this point, God had let me down. And I think this must be this. I know I'm not the only one. And I've come to find out there are more people in our church, in other churches. You're not the only one. Life isn't always going to be the joy of the Lord is your strength. Let's be happy. There's other emotions that we experience as Christians, and there's other things we experience on our journey. And eventually life and heartache will come to you.
Yeah.
And what we do with that, we at the church should be the forefront of dealing with these issues, but we don't know what to do with them. And we just, if you say something is wrong, people, have you noticed the response is to try to cheer you up? They say, well, at least you have other children, like, what the heck is that? I mean, that's such an insensitive thing to say, but I know they feel like they're trying to get you to feel better. But why do you need someone to feel better? Why can't we let somebody be sad?
Yes.
Why can't we let them grieve? Why can't we let them just be, if they doubt, if they're doubting my friend who doesn't even know if she believes in God anymore, I can't shove her out of that. I can't force her to move on past that. This is where she is, and it's where she needs to travel through. We as a church just don't have the vocabulary in our culture, and we don't have the culture of just embracing where we are. We have to give people the space to be where they are. Mm-hmm. We can't just force them out of it and say, well, I learned something. I learned a lot of things going through this, but one thing I have friends that have had miscarriages, and I think back to when they had theirs and were telling me about it, that I thought, oh gosh, I can kind of imagine what they'd be going through. But I realized I had no idea. I had no idea the mixed bag of emotions and the depth of what they felt.
Yeah.
And I think that is what we have to realize about everyone's issues, everyone's, whatever they're struggling with. We really don't know, unless you've actually been in that situation. You don't know what they are feeling and what they're having to carry and go through. So these things of trying to cheer someone up comes across very not condescending, but it comes across very haphazard and very insensitive. And like you're not acknowledging their pain. And when you're trying to heal from something, I'd say any therapist or counselor would tell you, you need to acknowledge, and you need someone to say what you're feeling is legitimate. It's okay that you have these, that you're upset and angry and frustrated and grieving. This is okay. And that's something in the church that we don't really do very well. We say, at least this, at least that. And if you're going to say somebody and it begins with the phrase "at least," just don't say it, because it's not going to help. You probably just keep your mouth shut and say, I'm so sorry. This has happened to you.
Yes. And I
just be with them.
Right. I totally agree, because I've experienced in my personal life, and then just seen so many times, and even the secular world acknowledges this about Christians, not to make a blatant statement, but also making a blatant statement. So many Christians will just beat you with, trying to cheer you up and trying to pull you back into what we know the Bible says, and like just make the declarations and read this verse and you should be fine, and all that's good. But at the same time, we do have to be given room. It's not about being right or wrong. And I think people have a tendency to, if you say something that goes against the Bible or what you've been taught, people have a tendency to be like, oh my gosh, we have to fix that. Well, if you would relinquish control and let a person work out their salvation with the Lord, because the Bible even says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. So things are going to happen, and you have to deal with that, and you can be there to help navigate as they need. But it is not at all about saying you are incorrect. You need to think and believe this way. Whereas, it's just about being there and allowing that person to have those thoughts and those emotions, whatever they may be. I was terrible. I mean, you knew me in some of my things that I went through back in the day, but I was really terrible. And I had a lot of people just trying to beat me over the head and just take me through enough deliverance, or just, pray for me enough that I would be sane and fine. But what I needed was somebody to just hold my hand and look at me and say, what you've been through was traumatic, and that was hard. And you get to be in this right now, but we can't stay here. And I always think about David in writing the book of Psalm. If you go and just read Psalm, he sounds like a bipolar man. He's he comes to the Lord one time and he's praising and he's so happy. And then the next moment he's just like, do you even hear me? Do you care? And he's real about his thoughts and his emotions, but he always tries to end on the note of, but I'm going to still believe. I am still here. I'm still trying.
Yeah.
So I love the book of Psalms because I think it gives permission to have
human.
Yeah, he's human and he had a lot of emotions, and you get to grieve. You get to deal with the human part of you and then work it out with the Lord how you need. So
yeah, exactly. I feel like I think we make pillars in Christianity, and a lot of times maybe those pillars are more man-made than they are of God. Mm-hmm. You know, when I left America and I was here after marrying Mark, and I've been here a few years. When you're away from your own culture for a few years, you start being able to see it from an outsider's perspective. And I remember realizing a lot of what I believed in my Christianity and my faith was actually cultural based, and it wasn't really even biblical, much less what Jesus said. You know, it was from where I was and what I was taught and how I was raised. And I began to change a lot of my viewpoints that even maybe differ from my parents, from the people that I grew up with, that I'm close to back home. And when this happened, the same kind of thing happened, where I started to realize maybe some of these pillars and some of these things that for me have been, you know, non-negotiable, maybe they actually are negotiable. And, you know, maybe what we've taken as biblical truth are really just doctrines that we've pulled out of scripture. You know, Mark was talking to someone a few months ago saying, you know, the word theology and doctrine isn't actually in the Bible. Like these are all things we've created ourselves in trying to make sense of what Jesus left for us, you know? So all of that is all man-made. It's all man-made, you know, and it's passed down, and it's church tradition, but is it really what Jesus meant? You know, there's a lot of room for interpretation there. And I've come to a place as well where I believe the Bible, but I put more weight on the New Testament, specifically the Gospels and specifically the red letters, than I do other parts of the Bible. You know, and I mean, I'll even say, like, does it really matter to who Jesus is if God took longer than 6 days to create the world? Like, I mean, if science is pointing one way, is that going to shake my Christianity? Do you know what I mean? I mean, these things are what our kids are going to have to address. You know, my kids are going to be taught that in school. Am I going to raise them so that their faith is going to be shaken? And I think that's where it comes from. When someone starts to question things, well, does God heal all the time? You can't say that. Like you were saying, I think it triggers this, oh God, like, if that's not true, what else is not true? And what else is not true? And what else is not true? Where it's like, calm down, let's just talk. And we believe God is bigger than this. He's not up there going, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? They're starting to question everything, you know. And when I was on this journey, I felt like from the very beginning, God, I'm angry with you, and we're going to have this out, and we're going to figure this out. But I felt like he was okay with that. You know, I felt like I was distant because I wanted to be distant, and I didn't want to have conversations with him. I didn't want to pray because I didn't want to feel the hurt and the anger. But I felt like he was there waiting for me when I was ready for it. You know, so I don't think these questions are making him unnerved. You know, I think the church always has to be questioning: are we doing things right? Like, we can't just do stuff because the generation before us did it. That's how you believe things like flat earth, or, you know, or that the earth is the center of the universe. You know, that's, you have to church has to always be changing and evolving, and the culture has to make it their own and still reconcile it to who Jesus was and is. So I think it's an ever changing journey. As for us personally, but also as a whole, as the body of Christ.
Yeah, I agree. And I love what you even said, that God isn't unnerved by a questioning, and he doesn't sit on the throne and look down and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe you think that, or anything. It's like any good relationship. I know I'm not married, but I know in a good marriage, or even in relationships, I have fought so hard with people that I love, and I've gone periods of time without speaking to them. And I'm sure in a marriage, you have those big fights where you might not be yelling and screaming, but it might be a good length of time that you are just not happy with your person. And it's not that, okay, well, now you've done it, you've made me angry enough or hurt me enough that I'm just going to pull out of this whole thing. It's just, I need a minute. Like, I'm going to work it out with you, but I can't get there right now. And I think as long as we know we're on the trajectory to work it out, I think that is fine and healthy. And God knows that. He knows we're human. So when he looks at us and we don't want to speak to him for a little bit, or we don't know what to say, or we're just so deep in our hurt, I don't think God freaks out or looks at us and shakes his finger and says, well, how dare you not speak to me? He's just like, okay, have your minute and just let me know. And I'm here.
Yeah.
So I think that's so important that people feel the freedom. I remember the first time that I felt like I could go before the Lord, because I was taught, you can't really, you can't question or challenge any of the things and that God says. And the first time that I realized I'm angry, because for years I wouldn't acknowledge that, because you're not supposed to be angry at God.
No,
I would just say, I'm not mad, I'm mad at this or this person or this thing, but I'm not mad at God. And I remember finally realizing, oh my gosh, I am really angry at God, and I'm projecting it on all these things. And my first coming back to the Lord and acknowledging that with him was very ugly. There were F-bombs and there was screaming. And it was me and my car, probably looking like a crazy person, but I had to get it out. And I don't think even, not that I condone just cursing all the time, but what I'm saying is, I just don't think God was sitting there in the car with me that night, like, oh, I can't believe you're talking this way. I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
He knew it was in there anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think we have to allow each other to do that, as we're working through things. Was there a Bible verse or a scripture or anything that you held on to during that whole time?
Well, just kind of what you were talking about with David, because of that relatability of him being human and him crying out and saying and lamenting, this whole thing of being able to express what you're feeling and not bottling it up and just saying, God is good all the time. Yeah. Like when he's going, God, where are you? I really need you and you're not here. Yeah. Kind of thing, because he does in the end make it to, but I'm going to trust in you. But you wonder, would he make it if he hadn't have expressed that to God? If he had just pretended his whole way, would he just fake it till he make it? Would he still have made it? I don't know. I don't know that I would make it if I just bottled it up. I think eventually I would have just exploded. Yeah. And people talk about that story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the fiery furnace, and they said, well, our God will save us, but even if he doesn't, we will not bow down and worship you. And people really love that story because God does save them. Yeah. God does save them according to the story. But there are, hundreds of thousands of martyrs that he didn't save, that were killed horribly and tortured for their faith, but nobody talks about that. They're the ones that had to live out, but even if he doesn't. Right. And I think, when things like this happen, like when we lost our baby, I wanted to know why. I really wanted to know why. And I knew even then that I wouldn't know why. I knew I would never get an answer to it. And now, for a year later, I still don't have an answer. to why that happened. But the anger has subsided. And I think when you are in these places, at least for me, talking about it was a huge thing, but not just to everybody, because everyone doesn't need to know your business and everyone can't understand your business, but having a couple of people who are going to just listen and be there for you and, curse along with you if you need to, if you need to shout and scream and or whatever, and not judge and just help you through it. And also I got counseling, and that was very, very helpful, because just having a third party who didn't know me, who didn't know anybody, just to talk to and validate what I was feeling. Because sometimes people that are closest to you can often be not validating enough of what you are feeling. And I would just say, it doesn't have to be a Christian counselor, like, or a therapy or whatever, is very, very helpful. And particularly if you're in church leadership, like, because we're in church, like, even more so, like, we're more responsible to get our emotional health together, because I think, like, all these stuff and crap that happens in churches are because people don't deal with this stuff. Everything's bottled, everything's hidden, everything's tucked away, but nothing stays hidden for long. If things went on in your childhood, you have to deal with them if you're going to be, leading people in church in any way. It's all going to come out, and you're going to lead out of all this dysfunction. So it was so good for me to talk and to be honest about how I felt. And I was lucky enough to have people in my life that I could do that with. So I mean, just think about, like, if, like, that person, that girl, like me standing there in a service, and I'm dealing with that, or my friend with all that she had been dealing with, standing there in a worship service. And oftentimes the praise and worship leader will go, I know you don't feel like worshiping, but stand up and lift your hands and clap. And I know they mean well, and they just want people to participate. But what if you said instead, it's, you may not feel like worshiping, but why not meet God where you are? If you're going through stuff, that's okay. God is willing to meet you where you are. If you can't stand up and clap, maybe just sit in his presence, maybe just, so that it's not this pressure, this group peer pressure to make you look like you're worshiping. Because the person who's sitting down with their eyes closed could be worshiping more than the person who's jumping up and clapping and making a big scene.
Exactly.
We need to maybe give people freedom to be a little bit more honest about where they are, and make it more acceptable when you're not happy and you're not, rejoicing.
I love that. And I think too, going back to you being a pastor's wife, if you're in any kind of leadership or have titles at all, there's this weird sense of, well, you have to have it all figured out. And I hear people all the time talk about how their faith and their walk with the Lord was somehow ruined or disappointed or whatever, because they watched somebody in a pastoral position or in leadership go through something hard, and it shook their faith. And first of all, your relationship with the Lord should never be dependent on who's leading you. But second of all, when you are a leader, you are a lot more accountable for yourself and for other people. Even me doing this podcast, and I've said it so many different times, like doing all the research and reaching out to people to have conversations has made me check myself and go, why do I want to have this conversation? What's the point of this? And what am I trying to convey? And it's out there. So my accountability went up. And as long as I'm aware of that, and I'm surrounding myself with people where I can, like you said, be very honest and vulnerable to that small group, then I can lead the others in a more healthy way. But being a pastor or in any kind of leadership, it doesn't make you a cut above at all. It hires your accountability and responsibility in a lot of ways, but it's still a messy process that you're working out. So I think for anybody who, especially if they're in a pastoral position like you are, if you don't have accountability, if you don't have people you can go to, you need to find that. But then for people who aren't in a leadership position, you've got to go, you've got to find somebody. And I think for me, if there's anything I want people to get today, it's like, it is okay to be where you are. It doesn't matter where you are. Even like your friend who's like, I don't know if I believe God right now. If that's where you're at, like, it's fine. But go find somebody who's going to love you and challenge you through that process.
Exactly.
I could talk about this forever an hour. I know we need to wrap it up, but if you could give one piece of advice to anybody who's going through a grieving period or a period where they're really disappointed or questioning the Lord, what would you say to them?
Yeah, it would be along those same lines. Like, just let yourself be where you are. You know, don't beat yourself up and don't let anyone just hurry you along. Be where you are and go through the process, because in going through stuff like this, I feel like this is what your journey of faith is. And in many ways, I almost feel like I know God more, or maybe know a different side of him, a different aspect of him, because I've been looking at him differently.
Yeah.
You know, if you just go along life and everything's fine, you don't really get to see the other aspects of God. But when things happen, and you have to actually think, and you have to actually decide and question things, you start to see things from a different perspective, and that's healthy.
Yep.
That's healthy as a human being, as a Christian. We don't know everything, and we never will know everything, and we're arrogant to think that what we believe is 100% right, because we're going to get to heaven and realize, no, we're probably wrong about a lot of things.
Yes.
And a lot of things that we made big deals about, and that may have made a stumbling block for other people, when in the end, it didn't really matter that much.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would just say, just to be kind to yourself, and let yourself kind of have time to go through the stages of grief. Talk to somebody, to friends, also talk to a professional as well, because they bring out stuff that is helpful and is very cathartic as well. And I was going to ask, I know it's gone on, if I could share just something that had happened to me pertaining to losing an unborn baby that I felt like God had showed me. And so if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead. I love it.
Great. Well, this had never happened to me before, but last year at the end, I think it was January, I had something weird happen to me, and I was in my room early one morning. I was awake, but my eyes were closed. But I was awake. That's the important part. I was fully awake, but just not, when your eyes are kind of sticky and you don't want to open them. I was in that zone, and it's like, I don't want the day to start. But I was awake. But to preface this, I have to tell a little bit tiny backstory. My parents, when they were married, they were 9 years trying to have kids. They couldn't have kids. And so then after 9 years, they had my older brother. But before they had him, they had a miscarriage. And Mom said, it wasn't talked about at that time. Nobody acknowledged things like that. And she said, we were busy, we were moving house, and I just kind of tucked it away and never dealt with it. Years later, when my brother and I were in high school, the church we were going to had a service for women who had lost unborn children. And she went to it and just got prayed for and ministered to and just got loved on. And she really started grieving for that baby that she had lost, 20 years before. And she said they told her there, ask, if you didn't know if it was a boy or girl, ask God what it was, what the sex of the baby was. And if you didn't name the baby, ask God what he named the baby, because there's not going to be a child in heaven without a name. So Mom always felt like it was a boy, and his name was Isaac. So we always grew up knowing that we had an older brother in heaven named Isaac. And she always felt that they didn't stay a baby, they grew up just like every other child. So I don't know, maybe they told her, I don't know. Well, so I'm laying in my bed last January, and my eyes close, and a man walks into my room, in my mind, right?
Yeah.
And I see this guy, not in reality.
No.
I see this man, and I'd never seen him before in my life. But I knew who he was. He looked like my brother, and he was about 40 years old, dark hair. And I said, oh, I know who you are. You're Isaac. And he said, yes, I am. And this is all happening in my mind, right? My eyes are closed. I'm awake. And he said, yes, I am. Now, what do you want to ask me? And I was like, okay. Is it true that you were raised in heaven? And he said, yes, I was. And I kind of chuckled, and I said, well, how does it feel to have the perfect upbringing? And I never forget what he said to me. He said, I longed for the upbringing that you had. Part of me will never be complete until our parents are up here with me. And my eyes shot open, and I sat up in bed. I was like, what the heck is going on? What just happened? Because I had felt like I was in control of everything I was saying, but I wasn't in control of what he was saying. And I thought about that for a long time, because he said, I long for the upbringing that you had, and I won't be complete until my parents are up here with me. And it was so weird. And I phoned my mom, and I told her, and she was crying. And so that was like January. And then, the whole thing happened with when we lost our baby. And my mom called me and said, that thing you told me about Isaac? She said, I think that was for you and not for me, because God obviously knew what was going to happen. And at first that made me even more angry. I was like, well, if he knew, then why would he let it happen in the first place, and all this stuff? But the more I thought about it, and I realized something. Now, this could be, if you don't agree with me, that's fine. But for me, it felt like, that boy, that man, Isaac, has spent his entire life in a perfect place, free from pain, free from worry, but yet he still is waiting to meet his parents.
Wow.
As much as my mom longs for him, it's like God is keeping this connection alive, and he's longing for her. And it gave me this, as much as I would want, and as much as I desperately wanted to be the one to raise this child. And as much as I long for this child is going to know me, and it's going to be waiting for me. And I know when I die and go to heaven, I'm not going to be just someone that comes up, just another face. I'm going to be mom to this person, And I thought, geez, I don't understand everything. I don't understand why, but I do see a great mercy in that he would let this child still long for me, that respect that bond enough, that this child would long for me, as its mom.
Wow.
So
that makes me want to cry. That's so good. Wow.
Yeah, it was the weirdest thing that happened, but out of it, I drew a lot of comfort from that. Yeah. And I think ultimately, ironically enough, that God had sent me that even before it happened. And yet, even while I was angry and so mad, that comfort was already there. Yeah. My counselor told me once, the very person that you're angry at is the one who will comfort you if you let him. I was like, well, I don't want to let him, but eventually, once you go through the anger, he will still be there.
Oh, I think that's so powerful. And, I know that this might be a very controversial conversation, but I think it's so powerful. And I so appreciate you being so vulnerable. I feel like your voice done vulnerability really well. And I love everything you just said, because I think it's so healing. It's so real and it's raw. And too many people aren't on the other side. And I know that you still have things that you're trying to reconcile and work out, but through the pain and all of the mess, the truth is that God is still good. He never changes. He is so redemptive, and Holy Spirit is always the comforter. So regardless of our feelings in the moment, God knew that you would struggle with anger towards him, but yet he sent that to you just to comfort anyway. And so I love that. Thank you. This was powerful. It ministered to me for sure. So, I think it's good. Even if I pray that anybody listening to this finds healing, and that anybody listening to this feels more freedom to get out and share their stuff and work through it. So thank you. I so appreciate it. You guys, if you liked today's
Thanks
episode,
for letting me share.
Yes, absolutely. And if people have questions, if people have things that they want to work through, find me on social media, lizameynig.com, or you can go to any of my contact list for emails, any of my social media, drop me a DM, and we will have this conversation. I want to pray for you if you need prayer, and like and subscribe this, share this with a person you think might need it, and I'll see you in the next episode.